Chapter 1. A quiet dinner in Little Elm. The clock in the kitchen ticked steadily, the only sound breaking the stillness of the small single-story home on the edge of Little Elm, Texas. Outside, the savory aroma filled the room. Garlic, thyme, and something warm and familiar, but Margaret didn't say a word. She sat like a statue, her white cane resting by the leg of the table, waiting for something she would never see. "Dinner's ready," Emily said softly, setting a bowl in front of her mother and another at her usual seat. Margaret nodded but didn't reach for the spoon. "Did your brother call?" Emily paused, the question hitting her like a cold wind. "No," she replied, forcing a calmness into her voice. "He's probably busy with work." "Of course he is," Margaret said with a faint smile. "That startup job sounds demanding. But I'm glad he's doing well." Emily didn't respond. She sat down slowly, stirred her rice. She said, "I had a few sessions." "What kind of sessions?" her mother asked, frowning faintly. "Oh, just video calls. You know, helping people organize. Like a freelance assistant." She had heard this line before, many times. In truth, she wasn't a virtual assistant. She was a licensed online therapist, conducting private mental health consultations under a professional alias, Dr. M. But she never told her mother, partly because of the years of being dismissed, and partly because Margaret believed anything not in an office wasn't real work. "It's flexible," Emily said. "I can stay home. Be here in case you need anything." "I don't need you to hover," Margaret snapped, though her voice was calm. "I'm blind, not helpless." Emily gave a tight smile. "Of course." They ate in silence. The quiet that settled between them wasn't peaceful, it was brittle, like glass on the edge of cracking. Emily knew every creak of the floorboards in this house, every breath her mother took. It had been almost 15 years since she gave up her full scholarship to NYU's psychology graduate program to return home after Margaret's accident. A snapped power line, a flash of light, and then darkness. Forever. She glanced at her mother now. Even without her sight, Margaret still wore her pride like armor. She knew better than to challenge that illusion. Her brother was not investing, he was sinking. Drowning in debt and charm. But her mother adored him. "That's nice," she murmured. She caught her reflection in the small window above the sink. Her own eyes looked tired, years of silence had weighed down her shoulders. There were so many things she had wanted to share. About the young girl in Kansas she talked out of suicide last month. About the single mother in Oregon who had sent her a thank you card. About the award she received for Best Telehealth Counselor Under 35. But those weren't stories for this house. "Do you want some tea?" she asked. "No," Margaret replied. "Just quiet." But then Margaret spoke, almost absently. "It's a shame you never married. You'd make someone a good wife if you weren't always hiding behind screens." And a silence thick enough to drown in. One of them couldn't see. The other had never been seen. Chapter 2. Dr. M at midnight. The clock read 12:17 a.m. when Emily finally slid into the soft leather chair in her small upstairs office, really just a converted guest room with beige walls and a single lamp casting a warm pool of light over her desk. Emily booted up her laptop, the glow illuminating her pale face. As the screen blinked to life, a familiar portal opened, the secure telehealth platform where she conducted her sessions. Username: Dr. M. Status: online. Next session: 12:30 a.m. Central Standard Time. Rainy day 32. She leaned back, stretched her arms overhead, and closed her eyes briefly. Late-night sessions weren't her favorite. But clients in different time zones or in different emotional crises didn't wait for morning. Rainy day 32 was new. Intake form said, female, 20s, insomnia, panic attacks, fear of elevators. Recently terminated relationship. Emily clicked through the profile and jotted some notes. Name: not provided. Location: Dallas, Texas. Session type: anonymous video plus voice. A chime sounded at 12. Her laptop perched on a cardboard box. Her face was half in shadow, but her voice was clear. Hi, she said. Is this Dr. M? Yes, Emily replied gently. You're in the right place. The woman let out a breath, shaky and small. Okay. I've never done this before. I almost didn't log in. I'm glad you did, Emily said. You're not alone. The woman looked away for a moment. Would you like to talk about what's keeping your brain racing? The woman hesitated, then whispered, I think I made a mistake. I broke up with someone. Someone everyone said was perfect for me. Emily blinked, her therapist instincts immediately firing. But it wasn't just empathy this time, it was recognition. Something about the cadence, the details, the city, the emotional bruises. Emily took a slow breath. That voice, that's not your truth. That's someone else's fear talking. I'm scared he's right, the woman admitted. I feel stupid. Like I ruined something I'll never get back. You didn't ruin anything, Emily said. You saved yourself. And that's one of the hardest, bravest things a person can do. There was silence for a long moment. Then the woman said, You're the first person who said that to me. Emily felt a tightness in her chest. This was why she stayed. Why she had chosen this work. Even if no one in her own house knew what she did. They talked for 45 minutes. By the end, the woman looked calmer, less like a cornered animal. Before logging off, when she closed her laptop and padded downstairs to the kitchen, she poured herself a glass of water, staring out the window into the moonlit backyard. Emily took a quiet sip. Her mother had always said, real work happens under real lights, with a name on a door. But here she was, working by lamplight, with no plaque, no recognition, and still. Somehow, helping strangers find the strength to face themselves. She placed the glass in the sink and whispered to herself, One day, maybe she'll see me too. Then she returned upstairs. Unaware that the woman she had just counseled, Rainy Day 32, was someone whose name would soon return and whose past would tie in with a truth she had never expected. Chapter 3. Daniel's Return. It was a Saturday afternoon in late January when the familiar rumble of an engine echoed through the quiet cul-de-sac. Emily glanced up from the book in her lap, her heart tightening. She didn't have to look to know what it was. Daniel's 2009 Jeep Cherokee, still running on an expired inspection sticker and at least 2 unpaid parking tickets. From the kitchen, Margaret called out, Is that Daniel? Emily closed her eyes briefly. Yeah, looks like it. She stood slowly, slipping the book onto the coffee table. Daniel was already letting himself in. Yo, he said, grinning, slinging a laptop bag over his shoulder. He wore a charcoal pea coat, too expensive for someone who claimed to be between jobs, and sunglasses despite the cloudy sky. Hey, he added, kissing the air near her cheek. Looking very librarian chic today. Emily offered a tight-lipped smile. Hi, Daniel. Danny, she exclaimed, rising slightly from her seat at the table, her hands reaching out. Daniel chuckled and pulled her into a half-hug. Hey, Ma. Missed you. I was just telling Emily we haven't heard from you, she said, clutching his arm like he might vanish again. Daniel slid into the chair next to her. Things have been hectic. The startup's been pulling 80-hour weeks. You know how it is. Emily remained in the doorway. What startup again? Daniel glanced at her, then looked away. Still with TechGo. We're doing a pivot. AI integrations for remote education platforms. Real next-gen stuff. Emily blinked. She'd heard this before, versions of it, anyway. Daniel was always 2 steps from greatness. Her therapist training had taught her when silence spoke louder than correction. As Daniel launched into a monologue about seed funding and IPO interest Emily stepped into the living room. It was labeled personal, urgent, and inside were 3 documents. A foreclosure notice for a rental property in Austin. A past due loan statement totaling $24,791. Later that night, after Margaret had gone to bed and Daniel had slipped out to grab drinks with a buddy, Emily sat at her desk again, scrolling through her client logs. She checked the file for Rainy Day 32. Still no real name. Still anonymous. But something about the voice, the hesitation, the story about a man borrowing money from her boss. Emily's stomach sank. Could it be? She didn't want to believe it, but the coincidence felt too sharp to ignore. If Raina Sullivan was the same woman who had once dated Daniel, and if Daniel had lied to her, manipulated her, and if she had then come to therapy as Rainy Day 32, what would that mean? What would that uncover? At 2 a.m., unable to sleep, Emily stood in the doorway of her mother's room, listening to Margaret breathe. She thought about the way their mother still called Daniel my golden boy, even as bills piled up and lies stacked higher. Whispering her shame to a stranger named Dr. M. Emily swallowed hard. This family had secrets. Layers of them. But maybe, for the first time, one of them was starting to peel away. Chapter 4. The sun was barely up when Emily stepped out to collect the mail. She needed airspace, anything that wasn't the tight walls of a house filled with illusions. As she flipped through the envelopes, one caught her eye. To Margaret Ellis, urgent response requested. The return address, Lone Star Lending Company. Emily's jaw clenched. Her hands tightened on the stack. Margaret's fingers reached for the pile. Anything from Daniel? Emily hesitated. No, just bills and a loan company. Margaret sighed, as if annoyed by the mundanity of the world. We don't owe anything. Emily sat across from her. Are you sure about that? Margaret turned her face slightly toward her, her pale, sightless eyes fixed somewhere to Emily's left. Do you really believe that? There was a pause long enough for Emily to regret pushing. Then Margaret said, curtly, I don't need to see to know when my son is trying. Emily's mouth opened, then shut. She wanted to scream. Instead, she stood and walked to the sink, gripping its edges. He's not the only one trying, she said quietly. What's that supposed to mean? I mean, Emily turned, I've been working too. Supporting this house. Taking care of things. Keeping the lights on literally and figuratively. And you've never once asked me how I'm really doing. Margaret's brow furrowed. Don't act like a victim, Emily. You live here for free. You cook, you clean. That's what family does. No, Emily said, her voice trembling now. That's what I do. Because I gave up a life to be here. And you've never even acknowledged that. Margaret said nothing. Emily swallowed hard, her throat dry. Do you know how many clients I talk to each week? Do you know I help people through panic attacks, grief, trauma, every day? People I've never met trust me more than my own mother does. Margaret's lip twitched. What clients? I'm a therapist, Emily said. Online. Private practice. I build it myself. I've helped over 1,000 people. The room went utterly still. Margaret blinked. You're not licensed. I am, Emily said. Both women froze, mother and daughter, across a table filled with unspoken truths. Then Margaret stood, slowly, pushing her chair back. I need some air. You won't see much out there, Emily said before she could stop herself. The door shut gently behind her mother. Later that day, Daniel returned. He walked into the house with a plastic bag of groceries, smiling like nothing had happened. Emily stood at the foot of the stairs, arms crossed. You're behind on your rent in Austin, she said flatly. Daniel blinked. What? I saw the notice in your bag. I can explain. No, you can't, she interrupted. Because it's always the same. The pitch, the charm, the crash. Then we clean it up. Daniel's jaw clenched. You think you're better than me because you're playing therapist to strangers on Zoom? I think I'm honest about who I am. And I don't lie to Mom's face. You don't get it, Daniel snapped. You've always been jealous. That made her laugh, a small, hollow sound. Of what? The freedom to fail without consequence? No thanks. He turned and stormed up the stairs. Emily stayed in the kitchen for a long while, staring at the pile of unopened mail. Then she reached for her phone and typed into the secure database. Client note, rainy day 32. Possible real identity linked to a personal connection. Conflict of interest. Recommend transfer to colleague. Notes confidential. She hit submit and felt something inside her settle. Margaret had not spoken much since the morning argument, only responding to basic questions with a clipped yes or no. Emily didn't push. The tension still sat thick in the walls like old paint, layers over layers, none of them quite dry. Daniel had disappeared again. No goodbye, no explanation. Just a text. Staying with a friend for a few nights. Don't worry. Emily didn't believe him. But worrying was a habit she was too tired to indulge anymore. The air outside had dropped below 40 degrees. The heater hummed through the vents, and somewhere in the attic an old pipe ticked as it cooled. Emily sat alone in the living room with the lights off. Her fingers curled around a mug of lukewarm tea. She wasn't sure how long she had been sitting there. Then, from the hallway, she heard it, soft footsteps, slow and uncertain. Margaret. Emily turned slightly. Need help? No, her mother's voice came. Just, couldn't sleep. There was a pause. Then the shuffle of the cane against the wooden floor. Her throat tightened too suddenly. I don't know when everything started to feel like a contest, Margaret went on, her voice quieter than usual. Daniel always needed so much. I thought I was doing the right thing, giving more to the one who seemed like he'd fall apart. You assumed I wouldn't, Emily replied. There was another long pause. Then Margaret said something that surprised them both. I heard your podcast. Emily turned toward her, eyes wide. What? Your voice, Margaret said. It was on the local public station last week. Just a snippet. A woman talking about being the unseen child in a family where someone else always needed saving. Emily's breath caught in her chest. I didn't know it was you at first. The silence between them wasn't brittle this time. It was full. I didn't think anyone would recognize me, Emily said finally. I didn't need to see you to know it was you, Margaret replied. I heard the sadness, the strength too, and the part of you I never took time to know. Emily's eyes stung, but she blinked hard. I'm sorry, her mother said. For the years I didn't ask. For the words I didn't say. For how much I put on you without ever thanking you. Emily exhaled slowly, the breath catching somewhere in her chest. I don't want to carry resentment anymore, she said. I just want space to be myself, to not feel invisible in the only home I've ever had. Margaret reached out a hand, trembling slightly, and found Emily's. She gripped it tight. You're not invisible, she whispered. Not anymore. They sat in silence after that real silence, soft and healing. Outside, a light snow began to fall, rare for Texas, even in January. Inside, the Ellis house, long cracked with old ghosts, held something new for the first time in years. Warmth. Chapter 6. The Letter from NYU. The next morning. Sunlight spilled gently across the hardwood floor in the kitchen, soft and golden, unlike the typical gray of Texas winters. Emily stood by the sink, pouring herself a fresh cup of coffee, when she noticed the envelope wedged under yesterday's stack of unopened mail. It was thin and aged, the edges curled slightly. The return address in the upper left corner caught her breath short. New York University, Graduate Admissions Office. 60, Washington Square South, New York, 10012. She froze. It took her a full 10 seconds to process what she was holding. It was the letter. The letter. The one she had never opened. The one that had arrived nearly 10 years ago, the same week her mother lost her vision and her brother lost his job for the first time. The envelope had somehow ended up tucked away with other unopened things in a drawer. She thought she'd thrown it away. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open. Dear Ms. Emily Ellis. Her eyes were already wet. Emily sat down at the kitchen table and laid the letter flat beside her coffee cup. It felt surreal. Like stumbling into a memory you'd sworn you buried in a box you never meant to open. She had given it all up the moment the hospital called. Your mother's surgery was unsuccessful. There's been optic nerve damage. She remembered the voicemail from NYU that came 2 days later. She never called back. She never even told anyone she got in. Until now. Margaret shuffled in with her cane, following the scent of coffee. Something smells like nostalgia, she joked, half asleep. Emily hesitated. Then, with a breath, she said, Do you remember when I applied to NYU? Her mother paused. You mentioned it once. I didn't think it was serious. I got in, Emily said quietly. On a full ride. Margaret's lips parted. When? The same week you lost your sight, Emily replied. I never told you. I knew you wouldn't want me to go. Margaret stopped. You should have gone. Emily turned toward her, stunned. What? I didn't know, Margaret said softly. I was so scared. Of everything. I thought if I had at least one child close by, I'd survive. I didn't think. I didn't see what I was taking from you. You didn't take it, Emily said. I gave it. Willingly. But it still cost me. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she reached toward the table. Emily took her hand and guided it to the letter. This, Emily whispered, was my dream. And I let it go without even looking back. But maybe now, it's not too late. Margaret's fingers closed over the paper, delicate as if it might crumble. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, I want you to chase it. Even now. Emily blinked. I already did. I got licensed another way. Built a career. Quietly. But I think part of me never forgave myself for walking away from that letter. Then forgive her, Margaret said. That version of you. The one who stayed. She did something extraordinary too. Emily smiled, tears sliding freely down her cheeks. In a house where no one had been truly seen, she was finally being recognized, not just as a caregiver or a quiet daughter, but as a woman who had sacrificed, rebuilt, and still stood. Later that day, Emily tucked the NYU letter into a clean folder and filed it with her credentials. It no longer represented loss. It was part of her story, proof of a door she chose not to walk through, and a life she still made meaningful on her own terms. A familiar voice returns. It was nearly midnight when Emily's work phone buzzed again. The blue light from the screen illuminated the dim room where she sat wrapped in a blanket, sipping her third cup of chamomile tea. She glanced at the caller ID on the telehealth portal. Incoming client request, rainy day 32. Request, urgent 15-minute follow-up session. Status, anonymity maintained. Emily stared at the screen. She had already filed a conflict of interest note. Protocol advised she should refer the client out. The video feed came on with no image, just the soft glow of a dark room and the blurry silhouette of the client's outline. Dr. M. The voice came, thinner than before. Yes, Emily replied quietly. I'm here. A silence followed. Then, I'm sorry for reaching out again. I know it's late. I didn't know who else to call. You don't need to apologize, Emily said. I'm glad you reached out. The woman on the other side took a shaky breath. I thought I was okay. I really did. But then I ran into someone I hadn't seen in a long time. And now I don't know what to believe anymore. Emily kept her voice steady. Do you want to tell me who it was? I don't think it matters, the woman replied. What matters is, I'm afraid I'll never trust anyone again. Every time I feel like I'm getting better, something happens to remind me that I'm still broken. You're not broken, Emily said. You're healing. And healing isn't a straight line. There was silence. Then the woman whispered, I almost didn't survive last year. I never told anyone. But that night, when I found your profile, your voice, it was like someone finally heard me. I think that's what saved me. Emily felt something catch in her throat. She didn't speak right away. I want to move forward, the woman continued. But part of me still carries so much anger. Anger at him. At myself. At the way I stayed so long, even when I knew something was wrong. Anger is part of grief, Emily said gently. You're grieving not just what happened, but the version of you that believed it could have been different. Exactly, the woman said, her voice cracking. And I'm tired. I'm tired of pretending I've already moved on. You don't have to pretend here, Emily said. And it's okay if you're still angry. It means you still care about your boundaries, your worth, your future. The woman was quiet again. Then she whispered, almost inaudibly, thank you. Whoever you are. Emily's heart pounded. She almost said, I know who you are. She almost said, you're Raina. But she didn't. Instead, she said, you're stronger than you think. And I'm here for you, whether it's 1 session or 10. You're not alone. They sat in silence a while longer, a silence laced with something rare recognition, even across the anonymous veil. After the call ended, Emily leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. She had helped Raina through the worst night of her life. And Raina didn't even know it was her. Now they were tied by something deeper than coincidence. A question stirred in Emily's mind. Should she tell Raina the truth? Or would that unravel what little trust Raina had managed to rebuild? Emily stood and walked to the hallway, passing the framed family photos on the wall. Her father, long gone. Daniel as a boy, full of promise. And one photo of her, age 12, arms crossed. Emily hadn't heard from Raina again, not as Rainy Day 32, not in real life. She didn't know what it meant. Maybe Raina had sensed something. Maybe she'd chosen to let go. It was early afternoon when Daniel returned, unannounced as usual, shoulders hunched beneath a navy jacket that had seen better days. Emily was in the kitchen preparing lunch, chopped greens. She wanted to see what he'd say next if he thought she wasn't around. But he didn't say anything else. Just stood in the doorway until his presence became impossible to ignore. Just stood there like he might bolt again at any moment. I need a favor, he said before she could open her mouth. Of course you do, Emily thought. Aloud, she asked, what kind? He hesitated. Then pulled a folded sheet of paper from his coat pocket and held it out. She took it and unfolded it slowly. A loan application. Forbearance extension. Signature line, Margaret Ellis, co-signer. Emily's eyes narrowed. You're not serious. I just need her signature to buy time, Daniel said quickly. It's not a new loan, just an extension on the one I already have. I'm trying to fix things. Trying, she repeated. Like the time you tried to flip that property in Garland and disappeared for 2 months? I know enough, Emily said. You've been lying to her for years. I haven't lied, he insisted. I've just managed expectations. Emily laughed bitterly. You call that managing? Just tell her it's paperwork for the bank. She'll trust you. That was the final straw. Emily stepped forward, holding the paper out toward him. You want her signature? Then you tell her what it's for. You tell her what it's really for. And if you can't, then you don't deserve it. Daniel looked at the floor. I didn't come here to fight. No. You came here to manipulate, Emily said, her voice low and sharp. Again. I'm trying to fix my life. Then start by owning it. They stood in a standoff for a moment, brother and sister. The air between them thick with years of resentment and exhaustion. Finally, Daniel exhaled and took the paper back, crumpling it slightly in his hand. Whatever, he muttered. I shouldn't have come. Emily didn't stop him this time. She watched him turn and walk toward the door. But just before he opened it, he paused. "She listens to you," he said, still facing away. "Always has. Even when she pretended not to. If I don't get help, I'll lose everything." He left without waiting for an answer. That night, Emily sat on the edge of Margaret's bed while her mother dozed lightly. She didn't bring up Daniel. Not yet. The thought of dragging her mother into another storm of half-truths and emotional blackmail made her stomach churn. But she knew it couldn't stay hidden forever. "But I don't know how to make them both understand that love isn't something we owe, we choose it. And sometimes, choosing it means walking away." She saved the file, then closed the laptop. A cozy, barnwood-themed cafe just off Highway 423. The hum of espresso machines blended with the murmur of college students and remote workers typing furiously. Emily had responded immediately. "Yes, I'm at the coffee barn in Little Elm. Corner booth. I'll wait." She had arrived an hour early, half hoping Raina wouldn't come, half terrified that she would. Her heart beat harder with each passing minute. Finally, just after 3:10 p.m., the bell over the door chimed. Emily looked up. There she was. Raina Sullivan. Slightly taller than Emily remembered, but still with the same thoughtful eyes and quietly elegant posture. She wore a navy coat, her dark hair tied back loosely. She scanned the room cautiously, then her gaze fell on Emily. She paused, just for a moment. Recognition flickered across her face. She walked over. "Hi," she said softly, standing just beside the booth. Emily rose. "Hi." They both hesitated. Then Raina sat down without fanfare. No handshake. No hug. Just two women separated by history and things unsaid. "I wasn't sure if I should come," Raina said, her fingers lacing tightly together. "But after our last session, or what I think was our last session, I couldn't shake it." Emily nodded. "You figured it out." Raina looked down. "I wasn't 100% sure. But the way you spoke, the calm, the phrasing, and then I remembered your voice from before. From that time Daniel made me call the house when he borrowed money using your mom's name." Emily exhaled, not in relief, but release. A long silence stretched between them. Then Raina said, "I didn't know about your mom. Or everything you gave up." Emily blinked. "It's okay." "No, it's not," Raina said. "I saw Daniel as this charming, lost genius. I didn't realize he was building his future by leaning on yours." Emily's eyes softened. "We all believed in him once." Raina hesitated. "He lied about a community initiative he said he was launching to help low-income veterans in Austin." Emily didn't even touch the paper. Typical. "I rejected it before I even realized it was him. But I don't know how to love someone who keeps using people as a crutch." "You don't," Raina said. "You draw the line, and you pray they eventually see it was never a wall." Emily looked at her. "You sound like a therapist." Raina smiled, a little sad. "Maybe I had a good one." They shared a quiet laugh, tired but genuine. Then Raina leaned forward, voice low. "With that history, with so much of yourself buried." Emily looked down at her tea. "I used to think I stayed because I was afraid to leave," she said slowly. "But now, I think I stayed because I wanted someone to choose me back. I wanted to be visible, indispensable, necessary." Raina nodded, the answer hitting a little too close. "And now?" she asked. Emily looked up. Her eyes were clear. "Now I stay because I'm rebuilding it," she said. "Piece by piece. Not for them, with them. And maybe someday I'll leave." Finally seen. Emily watched Raina walk away, then pulled out her phone. A new message blinked on her screen. From Daniel. "I need to talk. I'll come clean this time. Please." She stared at it, unmoving. Then, after a moment, she replied, "Only if Mom's in the room. No more secrets." Chapter 10. No more secrets. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Daniel returned. Emily sat with Margaret in the living room, the blinds half drawn, letting in soft winter light. Margaret, dressed in her favorite burgundy sweater, sat on the couch with her cane resting beside her, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of a folded handkerchief. "I told him to come at 2 o'clock, Emily said. Margaret nodded. "I know. He says he wants to be honest this time." Another nod. "I'm listening." The doorbell rang precisely at 2:03. Emily stood, heart pounding, and opened the door. Daniel stood there, more subdued than she had ever seen him. No sunglasses. No slick smile. Just a man holding a manila folder, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "Hi," he said. Emily stepped aside silently. Daniel entered, his eyes flickering to his mother, then to the familiar living room. Margaret turned her head slightly, as if following the vibrations in the floor. "Daniel?" she asked. "I'm here, Mom," he said, voice steady but flat. He sat down on the ottoman across from them, clutching the folder like a life vest. He looked at Emily once. She gave a subtle nod. "Go ahead." Daniel swallowed. "I lied to both of you," he said plainly. "I'm not working with any startup. I've been out of work for months. I'm in debt deep. Credit cards, loans, a failed business. I've tried to fix it, but it only got worse." Margaret was silent, her hands stilled on the handkerchief. "I applied for a loan extension," Daniel continued, opening the folder. "I brought the paperwork. I planned to ask you to sign it, Mom, without telling you the full story." He took a breath. But Emily said no, and she was right. He looked at their mother again. "I've used your trust, and I've used hers." Still, Margaret said nothing. Emily couldn't read her mother's face. Was it shock? "I found a program in Houston, a financial recovery and rehabilitation program. It's for nonviolent offenders, people with debt and fraud issues. They offer job retraining, accountability mentoring." Emily's eyebrows lifted. This was unexpected. "It's a 6-month program," Daniel said. "They'll help with my debt restructuring, but I need to commit fully. They even do housing. I need to know I'm not completely alone in this." Margaret finally spoke. "You forged my name once, didn't you?" she asked, voice calm. Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. "Yes, for a rental deposit. 3 years ago." A long silence. Then Margaret said, "You don't need my forgiveness right now. You need your own." Daniel blinked. "I've been blind a long time," she continued. "But I've never been as blind as I was with you. I thought protecting you meant believing everything you said. I thought love was loyalty. But I see now I was just afraid." Daniel bowed his head, shame radiating off of him. Emily reached for her mother's hand. Margaret squeezed it. "You should go to that program," Margaret said. "You should face what you've done. And when you come back, we'll see who you've become." Daniel looked up, eyes glassy. "You're not cutting me off?" "No," she said. "I'm letting you stand." He nodded slowly. "Thank you." "And Daniel," Emily said gently, "there's one more thing you should know." He looked up. "I know about Raina." Daniel paled. Emily continued, "She's doing well now. You hurt her, but she's healing. You don't owe her closure, you owe her silence. Let her move on." Daniel didn't argue. For once, he simply nodded. That evening, after Daniel left, the house felt different. Margaret sat in the armchair by the window, listening to a jazz station on the radio. Emily stood in the kitchen, pouring tea. Then Margaret called out softly, "You were right to make him tell me." Emily joined her. "You deserve the truth." "So did you," Margaret said. For a long time, Emily smiled, tired but genuine. "We're not perfect," she said. "But we're not broken either." Margaret turned her head, a faint smile forming. "I can't see your face," she said, "but I can feel that you're finally standing taller." In the days to come, the house would be quieter. The silence in their home was finally the kind that heals. Chapter 11. Letters in Braille. 1 week after Daniel left for Houston, a package arrived at the Ellis home. It was plain, unmarked, and addressed to Margaret Ellis, return address, Texas Center for Vision Rehabilitation, Austin, Texas. Emily brought it inside and placed it on the table. Something came for you, she said. She told me about a Braille publishing center her nonprofit partners with. I asked if they could convert some pages for me. Emily helped her open the package. It's your podcast. Emily's chest tightened. I asked her to transcribe it, Margaret said. The first 5 episodes. I wanted to feel the words you've been speaking all this time. Not just hear them. Not just imagine them. Emily sat down slowly, her throat too tight for words. Margaret traced the paper carefully. I never thought I'd understand your world. Now I'm trying. Emily swallowed hard. You don't have to do this. I want to, Margaret said. I want to know who you really are, not just who I thought you were when I needed you most. For a moment, the room was quiet, save for the wind brushing against the window pane. Then Margaret asked, will you read it with me? Out loud. Emily nodded. A woman who had learned to hold people's pain when no one held hers. And as Emily read aloud, Margaret traced the Braille beside her, line by line, sentence by sentence. They sat together like that for an hour, 2 different ways of reading, but finally the same story. That night, after Margaret went to bed, Emily stayed in the living room. She looked at the old photograph of their family above the fireplace, her father, before the cancer, Daniel, gap-toothed and carefree, her mother, still sighted and fierce, and herself. Half smiling at the corner of the frame, she pulled it off the wall. Behind it, taped to the wallboard, was a yellowing envelope, one she had tucked there 12 years ago and forgotten. Inside was a list, scrawled in a younger version of her handwriting. Things I want someday. Live in a city where no one knows me. Work as a therapist. Write something people read. Dance again. Hear Mom say, I'm proud of you. She smiled at the list, bittersweet, childlike, true. One line now felt different, because just earlier that week, Margaret had said it. I'm proud of you, Emily. She folded the list and tucked it back behind the frame. Not to forget. Hope you're okay. Tell Mom I'm thinking of her. Emily smiled, typed a brief reply, then sat down with her own list. She added one more item. Let myself be happy. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a guest in her own life. She felt like someone home. Chapter 12. The Invitation. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the email arrived. Emily had just wrapped up a particularly heavy client session, an elderly widower struggling with survivor's guilt, and was sipping lukewarm tea while staring out the window, lost in thought. Her phone buzzed with a single notification. Subject, Speaker Invitation, National Telehealth Mental Wellness Conference 2025. From committee@ntmw.org. She blinked. Emily clicked the email open, expecting it to be promotional or an automated blast. But it wasn't. Dear Dr. Emily Ellis, we have been following your work on trauma-informed care in virtual therapy spaces, particularly your podcast, The Invisible Anchor. Your ability to distill emotional complexity into clear, compassionate guidance has deeply resonated with our review panel. Your story and your voice deserve to be heard on a larger stage. Please confirm by March 1st to secure your place on the keynote lineup. Warm regards, Dr. Liana Robbins, Director, NTMWC Committee. Emily read the email 3 times. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, heart pounding. She had never spoken publicly under her real name. Her podcast was discreet, her name listed only as Dr. M, to keep work and family life separate. This would be her first public acknowledgement. No anonymity. No hiding. She closed the laptop and stood up, pacing the living room, her mind racing. She thought of her mother, of Daniel, of Raina, of everything she'd buried and everything she'd built. It was terrifying. But it was also freedom. That evening, Margaret sat at the table reading with her fingers, tracing the braille from episode 3. Emily sat down across from her and said, "I got an invitation today. But it's also public. It means people will hear my name, my story. Some of the things I've said on the podcast, they weren't always flattering to our family." Margaret was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Do you remember when you were 12 and you asked me if you could take dance lessons?" Emily blinked. "Yeah, you said no, that it was too expensive." Margaret nodded slowly. "I remember. But the truth is, I said no because I didn't want you to get used to people looking at you. I was scared of the world for you. And maybe, deep down, scared of what you'd become if you stepped into your light." She reached across the table, her hand finding Emily's. "I was wrong then. I don't want you small anymore." Emily's throat tightened. "You should go," Margaret said. "Let them see what I've finally come to understand, how extraordinary you are." Tears blurred Emily's vision. "I want you to come with me," she said. Margaret paused. "To New York?" "Yes. We'll figure out the accessibility. You can hear me speak. And feel the city again, even if you can't see it." Margaret was quiet for a long time. Then, "If you're willing to take me, I'll go." Emily smiled through her tears. It was more than just a trip. It was the crossing of a line neither of them had dared approach for years. She hit send. The future wasn't just calling, it was welcoming her by name. And this time, she was ready to answer. Chapter 13. The train to the city. The Amtrak train from Dallas to New York took over a day and a half with transfer stops, but Emily chose it over flying for one reason: Margaret. Her mother had always been terrified of planes, and with her vision loss, the idea of metal tubes in the air with no tactile grounding made it worse. The train, though Margaret could feel it. The hum, the vibration, the rhythmic sway of movement. It calmed her. "This is my first time leaving Texas in 20 years, Margaret said as the train pulled away from Dallas Union Station. Her fingers brushed the embroidered armrest of the quiet coach seat. "Feels like my bones are shifting." Emily smiled. "Maybe they are. In a good way." She had packed carefully. Margaret's medications, braille-printed summaries of the conference schedule, noise-canceling headphones, a preloaded playlist of jazz and spoken word recordings. It wasn't just a trip. It was a ceremony, a chapter turning. They passed through Arkansas by evening. Emily leaned her head against the window, watching the skeletal trees blur past. Margaret dozed beside her, her hand resting gently on Emily's forearm like she needed to confirm her daughter was still there. At one point in the night, when the train was stopped somewhere near St. Louis, Margaret stirred. "You nervous about the speech?" Emily nodded, then realized. "Yes, but in a good way. I think I've been holding my story like a secret for too long." Margaret gave a sleepy smile. "You never owed us silence." Emily looked out into the dark. "Sometimes I think I was afraid that if I told my story, I wouldn't belong to you anymore. You've always belonged to yourself." "That's actually kind of poetic." "I've been practicing," Margaret said. "Your podcast is rubbing off on me." The hotel room was on the 19th floor, her hand resting on the sill. "Do you want to go out?" Emily asked. "Let's just sit here a moment," Margaret said. "I want to hear the city." They did, for a long time. That evening, while Margaret rested, Emily walked 2 blocks to the conference center to check in. The main ballroom was massive, rows of white chairs, towering screens, and a podium lit like a stage. A volunteer handed her a badge. Dr. Emily Ellis, keynote speaker, Friday morning session. Topic: Silent rooms and unspoken stories, the weight of being invisible. Emily took a breath. As she turned to leave, someone tapped her shoulder. "Emily Ellis?" a woman asked. Emily turned and saw a familiar face. A bit older now, with softer lines around her eyes, but unmistakable. Dr. Leanna Robbins, her graduate advisor from NYU, the one she never told about withdrawing a decade ago. I didn't believe it when I saw your name, Liana said. You're the Dr. N? Emily nodded, overwhelmed. I remember your application. You were our top admit in 2015. Then you vanished. My mother had an accident, Emily said. I had to go home. And now you're here, Liana said, eyes shining. On this stage. On your terms. Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. It's surreal. You have something to say, Emily. Something the world needs. I'm proud of you for coming back, not just to the field, but to yourself. Emily smiled. It was the kind of smile that reached all the way into the place where pain used to live. That night, back in the hotel, Margaret was sitting up in bed with headphones on. You're late, she teased. Emily grinned and sat beside her. I ran into someone I never thought I'd see again. The stage and the story. The morning of Emily's keynote arrived with a kind of hush too quiet for New York City. Margaret stood near the hotel window in her pressed navy blazer. She couldn't see her reflection, but Emily swore it didn't matter. She looked perfect. At 8:30 a.m., they arrived at the Hilton Midtown Ballroom, already alive with quiet energy. Conference attendees buzzed through the lobby, therapists in name badges, mental health advocates, psychologists, and podcasters with crisp notepads and microphones clipped to their shirts. Emily clutched her own badge tightly. Dr. Emily Ellis, keynote speaker. Topic: Silent rooms and unspoken stories. She wore a simple black dress with a charcoal shawl and a pair of small stud earrings. She hadn't slept much, but adrenaline made her feel oddly clear. Margaret walked beside her, one hand on Emily's arm, the other gripping her white cane. Are you ready? She asked. No, Emily said, then smiled. But I'm here. They entered the main auditorium together. The stage was set with soft gold lighting, a tall lectern at center, and two wide screens projecting her name in sleek serif font. Hundreds of attendees filled the room, murmuring as they took their seats. Backstage, the event manager gave Emily a thumbs up. You've got 15 minutes. Take your time. Speak from your gut. Emily stood behind the curtain, eyes closed, remembering a very different kind of room, her childhood bedroom, in silence. And now this. Her name. Her voice. Her turn. She stepped on stage. The lights weren't blinding. They were soft, like a sunrise. She could see the rows of attendees, the video cameras, the screens. But what she focused on was the first row, where Margaret sat straight-backed and still, her chin tilted just slightly toward the stage, as if she could feel the shape of her daughter's voice before the words came. Emily stepped to the microphone. She didn't read from notes. She didn't need to. Good morning, she began. Her voice clear but gentle. My name is Emily Ellis. Some of you may know me as Dr. M. And for most of my career, I've hidden behind that name, not out of shame, but out of survival. I was born into a house where silence was a language, where emotions had to shrink to fit the space left behind by someone else's crisis, where I learned to become the anchor that held everyone together, even if it meant sinking myself. For years, I believed my value came from what I could give, from being useful, from being invisible enough not to take up too much space, too much time, too much air. But the truth is, being invisible is not the same as being safe. Sometimes, it's a slow kind of erasure. I became a therapist to help people speak the words they were never allowed to say. And somewhere along the way, I realized I had never spoken my own. This is my story. I'm not here because I was lucky. I'm here because I finally stopped asking for permission to exist. I stopped waiting to be chosen. And I want to say to every quiet daughter, every background sibling, every caregiver who thinks their story doesn't matter, you are not a footnote. You are the chapter. You are the voice in the silence. And your story deserves the mic, too. There was a beat of quiet. Then applause. Real, rising, earnest applause. In the front row, Margaret wiped her cheeks with a handkerchief. She didn't need to see to understand what had just happened. Her daughter had come home to herself. After the talk, dozens of people approached Emily, strangers thanking her, colleagues asking to collaborate, students wanting to learn. But the person she walked toward first was Margaret. She knelt beside her and whispered, "Did you hear it all?" Margaret nodded, voice trembling. "I felt every word." Emily placed her hand over her mother's. "Then I said it right." Margaret squeezed her hand. "You said it true." That evening, they walked quietly through Central Park. No rush, no schedule, just the late winter air and the hum of a city that no longer felt overwhelming. "Emily?" Margaret said softly. "Yeah? I used to think the bravest thing a person could do was sacrifice everything for family." Emily looked at her. "And now? Now, I think the bravest thing is to be yourself." Return to Little Elm. They returned to Texas just as February slipped into March, carrying with them not just luggage, but something less visible. Weight lifted. Words spoken. New pages begun. The train back felt different. Not like escape or obligation, but like return on purpose. Emily sat by the window, watching the flat Texas landscape roll past in wide, slow strokes. Margaret dozed beside her, chin tucked into her scarf. She looked peaceful, even younger somehow. The city hadn't worn her out, it had woken her up. At one point, the Ellis house welcomed them home with creaky floors and a familiar smell of old wood and chamomile. Emily unpacked slowly, savoring the routine. There were still cracks in the paint, still unopened boxes in the attic, still silence at times, but everything felt lighter. And then, 2 days after their return, came the letter. Handwritten, postmarked from Houston, addressed to MS. "Thank you for not protecting me from the truth. Thank you for letting me fall. That fall is teaching me how to stand. I'm still figuring it out, but for the first time, I want to figure it out. Love you both. See you in June. Daniel." The poem came last. Not the favorite. By D. I was the loud one, the charming one, the collapsing one. You were the quiet breath, the steady hand, the holding wall I leaned against without thanks. Now I see you. Now I name you. Now I start again. Emily folded the poem gently, her eyes wet. Margaret reached across the table and took her hand. He's still ours. Emily nodded. But now he belongs to himself, too. They didn't speak for a while after that. Just sat in the kitchen, side by side. Two women who had once lived in separate silences, now sharing the same page. Chapter 16. The Blueprint. It was a rainy Sunday when the idea arrived, not with thunder, but with quiet. Emily was sipping coffee at the kitchen table, scrolling through a backlog of emails. Margaret sat nearby, gently tracing the raised dots of a new Braille book Raina had mailed from Dallas, a memoir written by a trauma counselor. Rain tapped steadily against the window panes like a metronome keeping time with their calm. The email subject line caught Emily's eye. Funding opportunity. Emily said. Small support groups. Parenting circles. A quiet room. Free therapy hours. And maybe a podcast recording corner with live conversations. Margaret chuckled. So we turn the Ellis house into a therapy sanctuary? Into a place where people can come and not feel ashamed to say they're hurting, Emily replied. A place that doesn't ask you to be fixed. Just seen. Margaret's expression turned thoughtful. People don't always know how to be seen. Sometimes they need someone to teach them how. Exactly, Emily said. That's why it can't look like a clinic. It has to feel like a kitchen table. Like this. She gestured to the space around them. Margaret ran a hand along the old wood of the table. Then we better sand this surface, she said. Can't have splinters in a safe space. Emily laughed. We'll call it the listening room. Margaret's smile was slow and sure. Not bad. Later that afternoon, they walked the property together. Emily measured the porch with her phone's AR app. Margaret stood nearby, listening to birdsong, tapping her cane softly along the baseboards. "We'd need better insulation," Emily muttered, noting the drafts. "And ADA access. And soundproofing the back room for private sessions." Margaret lifted her face toward the breeze. "We'd need a better kettle. Can't serve healing without tea." Emily grinned. "You're hired as kitchen coordinator." "Only if I get a name badge," Margaret said. The next morning, Emily drafted the grant proposal. She listed her credentials, her local work, her podcast's reach, and then she added a personal note. "This house raised me. It shaped me. And for years, it kept my voice small. But now I'd like to open its doors to others who don't yet know they're allowed to speak. We're not building a business. We're building a table. Everyone deserves a seat." She read the draft aloud to Margaret. When she finished, Margaret simply said, "Submit it. And then go make tea." The rain continued all week, but it didn't feel gloomy. Quiet. Run by local therapist, Dr. Emily Ellis. Location: the Ellis home, Elm Street and Willow Bend. No appointments. Just come as you are. By Friday, there were murmurs. The barista at the cafe mentioned it. A school counselor called Emily asking if she could refer a struggling parent. Someone even dropped off a potted plant at their front door with a note. "You helped my sister through a dark winter. I recognized your voice from the podcast. Thank you." Emily stood with Margaret on the porch that evening, both of them holding mugs of lemon ginger tea, watching the sun dissolve into streaks of orange and dusty blue. "You know," Margaret said, "this house hasn't felt new in decades. And yet it does now." Emily nodded. "It's not the house. It's us." They had just turned to go inside when it happened. A knock. Gentle. Uncertain. Emily opened the door to find a woman standing there in a gray hoodie. Her blonde hair pulled back, eyes red-rimmed and unsure. It took her a moment to realize. It was Raina. "Hey," Raina said, voice shaky. "Sorry to drop in like this." Emily blinked. "No, it's okay. Come in." Raina stepped across the threshold slowly, eyes darting toward Margaret, who had turned toward the sound with interest. "Mom," Emily said gently, "this is Raina Sullivan." Margaret offered a hand, which Raina shook softly. "You're the voice that saved me," Raina said, just above a whisper. "And I think I'm finally ready to thank you properly. But I think part of me needed to stand where it all started." Emily offered a soft smile. "How have you been?" "Better," Raina said. "Still have hard days. But now I see when I'm triggered. And I stop. I breathe. I remember what you taught me, that my value doesn't depend on someone else staying." Margaret said quietly, "That's harder to learn than people think." Raina looked at her. Then Raina opened her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "I never told you this, Emily, but I write grants for nonprofit initiatives." First circle. Saturday morning in Little Elm was unusually warm for early March. The sun filtered gently through the leafless branches above Elm Street, casting long shadows across the Ellis yard. A small chalkboard sign leaned next to the porch steps. "Today, first listening circle, 10 a.m. Tea. Silence. Safe space. All welcome." Emily stood in the kitchen, her fingers trembling slightly as she poured hot water into mismatched mugs lined along the counter. Lavender, chamomile, peppermint. No clinical forms. No intake paperwork. Just warmth and time. Margaret was in the living room, arranging pillows in a half-circle on the rug with Raina's help. She counted each step with her cane and softly recited the name of each person expected. 6 total, she said. "Not counting us." Emily nodded. "That's perfect." At 9:55, they opened the door. The first to arrive was a middle-aged man named Ted, recently retired and struggling with loneliness after his wife passed last fall. Then came Maria, a schoolteacher on leave after a burnout diagnosis. After her, a quiet couple, Micah and Jamie, who said almost nothing but held hands like a lifeline. then a teenage girl, no name given, just a hood and shy eyes. And finally, just as Emily was beginning to think no one else would come, a knock. She opened the door to find someone she hadn't seen in months. Daniel. He looked older. Not in a bad way, more grounded, less sharp around the edges. He wore jeans, a plain sweatshirt, and carried no mask of charm. Just himself. "Can I sit in?" he asked. Emily blinked, then stepped aside. Of course. The group sat in a loose circle, the morning light warming the space between them. Emily sat cross-legged, Margaret to her right, Raina beside Margaret. Daniel sat at the far end of the circle, next to the teenager, who didn't flinch when he offered her a cup of peppermint tea. Emily took a breath. Welcome to the listening room. There's no pressure to speak. You're here to be witnessed, not judged. If you want to share, we'll listen. If you don't, we'll sit beside your silence. They began with 10 minutes of quiet. Not awkward quiet, intentional. A space for people to arrive in more than just body. Then, slowly, stories unfolded like paper. Ted spoke about the ache of going to sleep without a hand beside him. Maria admitted she hadn't laughed in weeks. Micah described the terror of being seen as weak for going to therapy, while Jamie gently squeezed his hand. The girl didn't speak, but she stayed. No one would see how lost I was. He looked toward Margaret, then at Emily. But someone saw through it, and instead of saving me, she let me fall. I hated her for that at first. But now, no one needed to. The room breathed with him. After the session ended, people lingered. They helped gather cushions, refill the kettle, fold blankets. Not as guests. As roots taking hold. Daniel stayed to sweep the front steps. As Emily walked him to the porch, he said quietly, I sent a letter to Raina. Apology only. No reply needed. Emily nodded. That's the right kind. Daniel smiled faintly. Feels good to do something that isn't about me for once. They stood in silence for a moment, watching two bluebirds settle on the low garden wall. Hey, Daniel added. Next week, can I bring someone? Guy from my program. First timer. Emily smiled. Of course. There's always room. That night, Emily sat alone in the now empty circle room. The soft lamp glowed in the corner. The chairs were still warm from bodies. The air carried hints of peppermint and lavender. She thought about the girl in the hoodie. The call from Austin. The call came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, just as Emily was finishing a one-on-one session with a newly divorced father trying to reconnect with his teenage son. Her phone buzzed once, then again. Austin, Texas, unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Hello. Hi, this is Casey Mendez from the Texas Mental Wellness Fund. May I speak with Dr. Emily Ellis? This is she. Hi, Dr. Ellis. I won't take much of your time. I just wanted to speak directly. We've reviewed your proposal for the listening room. It stood out in all the right ways. I mean, we're recommending your project for full funding with a conditional expansion. Expansion? Emily asked carefully. Yes, Casey continued. Your model is inspiring, grassroots, trauma-informed, community-based. We think it's a framework worth replicating. Our board wants to offer not just the original $100,000 grant, but an additional $200,000 to pilot 2 more listening rooms across rural Texas under your leadership. Emily blinked. We'd support your hiring a regional coordinator, Casey said. It's a significant change, but one we believe you're ready for. Emily sat back slowly. That's generous and overwhelming. I understand, Casey said. You don't need to decide now. This wasn't about healing a house anymore. It was about helping reshape how people heal that scale. That night, Emily sat on the porch with Margaret, the sun setting in deep streaks of plum and amber. She explained everything, word for word. Margaret listened quietly, then asked, Do you want it? Emily stared out at the street. Part of me does. It's the kind of chance I never imagined I'd get. Daniel, Maria, Ted, and 2 other community members who had stepped up to volunteer. She laid it all out. After a long pause, Raina said, "You don't have to choose between growing and grounding. We'll help hold this place steady while you plant more." Daniel added, "You trusted us enough to tell the truth. Trust us now to carry the room forward." Emily looked around at the mismatched circle of once strangers who now breathed like a single rhythm. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "We grow." That night, she sent the reply email. "Dear Casey, thank you. I accept. Let's build more places that listen. Dr. Emily Ellis." In the weeks that followed, blueprints arrived. Lawyers drafted nonprofit structures. A web designer volunteered to build a simple site. Raina trained as a peer leader. Daniel began mentorship calls with former inmates seeking re-entry. And the original listening room? It stayed open. Every Saturday. Every Wednesday night. Every quiet corner still honored. Emily still sat in the circle sometimes, not as the guide, but as the one needing to speak. Because even healers need to be heard. Chapter 20. Full Circle. The second listening room opened 3 months later in a quiet corner of Lubbock, Texas. Inside a repurposed church building with chipped paint and stained glass windows that still caught the afternoon sun. Emily stood at the front door with a key in her hand, Raina beside her. And people came. A week after the Lubbock launch, Emily stood once again on a train platform, this time alone. Her backpack carried one change of clothes, a folder of lecture notes, and a single sealed envelope. She was headed to New York, back to NYU. But this time, not as a student, as a guest lecturer. It was Dr. Leanna Robbins who invited her to speak at a spring seminar titled Therapy in Transitional Communities. The email came simply, with the subject line, "Let's finish your story. On your terms." When Emily arrived at NYU's Silver Building on Washington Square South, she paused at the front steps and inhaled deeply. 10 years ago, she had passed on this place. For grief. For duty. For love. Now, she wasn't here to reclaim it. She was here because her path had finally curved back, not to fix the past, but to honor it. The classroom was smaller than she expected. 30 or so students, most scribbling in notebooks, a few recording on their phones. Dr. Robbins introduced her warmly, then stepped aside. Emily stood at the podium, her voice calm. "I was accepted into this program 12 years ago," she began. "I never came. Life got in the way. Maybe more accurately, I stepped into a different kind of classroom. One made of grief, caregiving, resentment, healing, forgiveness, and community." She told them about Little Elm, about her mother, about Daniel, about the invisible roles people play in families and the weight they carry. Then she talked about the listening room. "How we heal," she said, "isn't about turning pain into performance. It's about holding space. Over time. With intention. With softness." "You should have been one of our best graduates," she said. Emily smiled. "I still might be." She didn't mean academically. She meant a graduate of her own survival. On her last morning in New York, she walked alone through Central Park. Birds flitted low over the grass. Joggers passed in packs. A little boy tried to feed a squirrel with a granola bar. She stopped at a bench near the lake and opened the sealed envelope in her backpack. It was the original NYU acceptance letter, creased, worn, but whole. She read it one more time. Then she folded it gently, stood, and tucked it into the pocket of her coat, not to bury it, to carry it, as proof that some dreams don't die. They just change shape. Back in Little Elms that weekend, the Saturday listening circle was already underway when she returned. She slipped in quietly, nodding at Ted, smiling at Raina, squeezing Margaret's hand. She sat at the last empty cushion in the circle and listened. Chapter 1.